Those I'm John Griffiths from Deputy Head of Profession. We welcome Simon. I won't say any more about what he's done because we'll probably ruin some slides. That makes sense? Is that better? Sure. We'll take questions. Simon's happy to take questions as we go, but also take questions at the end. We'll have a conversation about his thoughts. My reflection would be is that we tend to have experts in project management who either have created new methodologies or tend to be academics. We have experts who actually deliver major programs, and that's probably more important than relevant to us. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, I'm Simon Wright, project manager. I started off in civil engineering, so I'm training. I'm going to talk about two major programs that I've been closely involved with, and I've titled this some highs and some lows because I was asked not to sort of just put the usual sort of, oh, everything was wonderful and brilliant and it was all glorious and we went home. So I'm going to start with something that was pretty good and then go on to something that certainly has had some challenges. You'll know about the latter one probably quite well. But go on in.
Yeah, go in. Yeah.
So the Olympics, I was in Arras, happily minding my own business, doing some project management. When I got a call from somebody I knew slightly, who said, "Would you like to come and be on the long list for joining the Olympic Delivery Authority?" Which I heard about the Olympics. Anyway, long story short, I did eventually join the ODA as the Director for Infrastructure and Utilities. My wife thought it was a very prosaic title, Director for Utilities. How exciting can that be? Actually, it was rather exciting. The Games is obviously huge. We all know, the biggest world sporting event, massive challenge. So, how do we go about organising ourselves? As I said, it's probably the largest event globally and takes, a huge amount of effort and governance to get things right at the start. And this is how things were set up. So I joined the Olympic Delivery Authority. You probably remember most of this. LOCOG, London Organising Committee of the Olympic Games, were a private sector organisation who came under the IOC. We came under DCMS, Culture, Media and Sport at the time. And there was this Olympic board which drew it all together, and that really was the key. Drawing these things together, creating the integration, the harmony, sense of purpose, the direction, so that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. And on the Olympic board was government, but also others, including sport, British Olympic Association. So all parties represented in that governance structure. Where was it? Well, over in East London, in the Lee Valley. And of course, that wasn't just by chance. So the idea was that this would become a stimulus for regeneration. So the public investment was there for the Games, but it was there more importantly to stimulate jobs and growth and housing in what had been the private parts of London, in boroughs, well, mainly in Newham, but some other boroughs as well. And you can see how close it was to Canary Wharf. So this is the site. That's what we started with. And it was a very, very, very challenging site indeed. Hugely contaminated, huge piles of waste, a major problem as to how to deal with it. But the first thing to do is, of course, to make an assessment of what you start with. And this is what we started with. This is the Olympic Park in 2006 when I started, an absolute mess, really. But within that were some viable businesses. So it's very important to understand the very complicated canvas that you start with when you're doing these very large regeneration projects. Oldham Common, which I'm sure some of you will know well, is a very similar case in point. It's been very, very difficult. In fact, now has come into very big problems in terms of assembling the land and getting a plan together. So we started with this, hugely complicated, lots of railways, lots of rivers, lots of canals, and quite a lot of homes as well, which obviously is very, very sensitive to start thinking about putting people out of their homes. Master plan, two master plans, in fact. So we start with the Games. How are we going to deliver an Olympic Games? But most importantly, what are we going to do afterwards? So all very well having a fantastic Olympic Games, but actually what the country also wanted, and the government very much wanted, was a long-term legacy master plan to allow us to avoid white elephants, which Athens has certainly had the challenge of, and to make sure that what we did was investment for the future. As far as possible, putting money in that was there for the long term, not just for the games. And so that was our watchword: games time and transformation and legacy time. And if we were ever to have compromises, we always tried to make it that the long term would win out, that we would always make sure the investment was most focused on the long term. And that was pretty difficult when the IOC and LOCOG have no interest in the long term, are only interested in the games. They want to have that perfect. There were lots of things to broker, compromises to be made. We needed a plan. You always need a plan, clear plan. This is very simple. This is the top level, and level 0 or even more top level than that. So we set out some clear phases, and that enabled several things. One is it's easy to communicate that sort of level of plan. Secondly, it allows yourself to measure very crudely, in terms of the public, how you're doing against it. So we said very, we like these sort of terms. They're sort of understandable terms. The big build was quite sort of good one people get their head around. And of course, legacy, very importantly, features in our 5 clear phases. But not only were we trying to build a very big project, but we're also trying to do it in a way that was exemplary. So not just about bricks and mortar, not just about pouring concrete. It's about some other stuff as well that we're trying to promote. Government, if you like, imperatives or government initiatives, that DCMS and others were very keen that we act to try and push forward with that huge amount of public investment. Health and safety, of course, is paramount. That's not an option. But as always, we never say it's #1 priority, because priorities can be downgraded. It's a value. It's a core value. We believe it in here. Design quality, of course, is very important. We only have one environment. We all want to enjoy it. It has to be delightful, has to be wonderful, has to be sustainable. So design quality, inclusion and access, very important, has to be right. Employment, we want to create jobs in the East End of London, create skills, have training programs, allow local people to get into the employment, allow youngsters to get trained so they got jobs for the future. Huge amounts of effort go into that in big programs like this. Sustainability, as I said, and that's in the wider sense, environmental and economic and social. And then, of course, legacy, again, that famous phrase that we never forgot about: what do we do long term? Procurement, well, ODA thought of themselves as a lean client, i.e. didn't want to get too huge. And we did, first of all, want to obviously create a budget. You will think very well in your department. This is very important early on. And in order to have a budget of any meaning, we had to have a baseline, a set of baseline requirements. It took quite a long time to get there, but we did eventually, in 2007, create this baseline report. And that allowed us to create a budget, which was then approved through Parliament at 9.1 billion. ODA, the government agency that I work for, remained responsible for our policies, of course, for that budget, the scope of work, the business cases, and stakeholder management, most importantly. But we hired ourselves a delivery partner because we wanted to remain relatively small in numbers, and they provided those additional skills from the private sector. That was in terms of design management, risk, construction management, etc., etc. And that was a relatively hard contract, arm's length, very highly incentivized. Of course, we were very collaborative in our arrangements and working with them, but they were an arm's length delivery partner in terms of the form contract. Quite different to some others I'll come on to that we have elsewhere, but I think one that actually worked pretty well. So, starting on the job, Fridge Mountains, famous sort of sites of Newham. Huge amounts of high voltage electric cables overhead. Couldn't run the games. We couldn't build stadia with these great big high voltage cables. So they were put into underground tunnels. One of the very successful early contracts, the LDA ran actually, and the LDA, a good organization in many ways. They started all this off very early, and they needed to, because in order to start building stadia, we had to get the site cleared. If they hadn't have done that as early as they did, we wouldn't have been able to start when we had. So a very piece of successful early enabling works. Demolition, as I said, these were not people's homes, they were student accommodation, but they had been emptied somewhere. So some very big blocks of demolition. This wonderful machine, which is just one person operating very safely from a distance. And that's what it does. So it's a wonderful thing to watch that and the start of those works and clearing the site and the start of the remediation. Archaeology, I mean, many of you will know in your projects how important that is these days. And this is unbelievably an archaeological excavation. It's absolutely huge. And you can see down here, you can just see, you can see actually, but you should be able to see the outline of Roman roads and all kinds of interesting stuff. Very significant depth we had to excavate that out before we could start other work. So that all proceeded. The big push was contaminated land. The whole site was highly contaminated with just about everything that you could conceive of. And we weren't allowed to dig it out and dump it in landfill. That was absolutely not acceptable in 2006-7. So the watchword is soil washing. So you have to take every cubic meter of material from the whole of that site and wash it clean, euphemistically. And then you get a very small fraction of contamination and a very large amount of sand and sediment you can reuse. A very small fraction you do, of course, have to take off site. Oil, tars, heavy metals, that sort of thing. But the volume is hugely reduced through this process. So a very, very successful process. Just a short story. Our first chairman, not John Owen, but chairman before John, said in one of the first meetings I went to, board meetings, that this was impossible, could never happen. The Olympic Park could never be cleaned up, not for the money we had, and certainly not at the time we had. And he basically said that we were all out of control and he had no confidence in the executive. Luckily, that gentleman left within 3 months, and we were happy to prove him wrong. We were very confident in what we were doing. Furthermore, after cleaning up the site, you've got utilities, director of utilities. And we thought we wanted something that was sustainable, something modern, something efficient, something different. So we put in district heating. We said each site cannot have their own boiler. And of course, it was in the days where gas was still acceptable. Not anymore, I'm afraid. We can't do gas anymore, can we? It's all going to be ending. But in those days, gas was the most efficient thing. So we had CCHP, combined cooling, heat and power. Very efficient use of gas. Plus wood-fired boilers. Now, it's remarkable to think nowadays that actually we thought wood was a good, sustainable fuel. It is in some ways, but I must admit, in other ways, I'm no longer convinced. Back in the day, that was considered to be a sustainable solution. It produces chilled water and hot water to feed the whole of the Olympic Park and the athletes' village in that one plant. And it was designed and built by the private sector, so off the balance sheet, DBFO, by a private contractor. We would run it for 40 years and we'll go on selling heat beyond the park into the local neighborhood. So it is a pretty efficient scheme. Talk about design excellence. Now, whether you think this is excellent or not, it's certainly different. This is a sewage pumping station, or Pinky and Perky. But utility buildings do not have to be boring, ugly, hide them away, embarrassed behind a fence. Let's make them wonderful, brilliant, exciting, interesting. Okay, I'm a civil engineer. I can talk about architecture like that. If you're an architect, of course, it's more challenging to get engineers to listen, but we have to listen. I know HS2 are putting a lot of effort into design. It's about design quality. It's not about having to pay loads more money. It's about just thinking things through, making things actually delightful rather than just normal and dull. So let's do more of that. Lots of roads and bridges. We built, I think, 26 new bridges. And you can see gains and legacy. So in gains time, we need a lot more width. So we built some temporary bridges. A lot of these are some temporary span, that's the permanent span. Temporary span, very cheap and cheerful, doesn't only have to be there for 1 or 2 years, got taken away, recycled. Permanent span stays long term. So very efficient use of utilities. Stadia, this is the Olympic Stadia site in April 2007. And you can just see the timeline, 2008. I don't remember when that was, I think about 2010, and finished in 2011. So incredible progress, really, 4 years to build a major Olympic stadium. But again, some of it was temporary. And you know the story about West Ham coming in later on, because West Ham didn't want to do a deal when we were trying to do the deal. They were actually bankrupt, basically. They were owned by the Icelandic consortium, but they had no money at all, couldn't do the deal. So we built it as a demountable athletic stadium, which is what Seb Kerr always had promised. It obviously became a football stadium later on, but a lot of it was reused. Other stadia, very beautiful buildings. This is the Velodrome, should have won the Sterling Prize in my humble opinion, but didn't. But it was a very beautiful, very, very sustainable building, very efficient. And of course, the athletes were delighted when we managed to finish early, give them a chance to do training, to do test events, get onto the venues, and to get them to, obviously, we let the GB team in soonest. But a lot of temporary venues. So first of all, legacy. You don't want venues that have no long-term use. Secondly, sustainability. Don't put a lot of embodied carbon into something that will not be there permanently. So this is temporary. This is the basketball stadium. And that was purely 100% temporary. Very big stadia, but all taken down and reused elsewhere in components. It wasn't reused as a venue, it was reused by component. So pretty efficient use of materials. Huge athletes village. Another little story. Athletes, I was responsible for running the whole of the park and the village during the games. We did the hard FM, local ran the sport, we ran the venues. Athletes all turn up on the same day virtually, so you've got about 40,000, something like that. 40,000 people turn up on virtually the same day. They handed out their keys to their rooms. Question, why do we have keys, not cards? But anyway, we did. And they lose them all. So day 2, 40,000 athletes. Oh, sorry, I lost my key. Another one, please. How many key cutters are there in London that you can mobilise in 24 hours to cut 40,000 keys? Not enough. One of the risks we have not talked about. We did do it on day 2 or 3. There are Olympic stadiums, fantastic. Events went really well. The country was proud. We won basketball to gold medal in the Super Saturdays, and it was glorious time. On budget, early, everybody was delighted. And we wrote some stuff about it. So that exists, the learning legacy exists. I think we were the first people really to do it in that way. Still there. It's in the National Archives now, but you can still access it by typing in ODA Learning Legacy or London 2012 Learning Legacy. The learning, well, I think you need all these things. I won't really go through every line. Vision, ambition, and conviction. Having this as a huge global event obviously makes it very, very helpful because the country can kind of rally behind it. It's a lot harder when you don't have that sort of underpinning your program. Getting the right people in, realistic budget, put out a firm baseline. Don't change your mind, of course. Change is difficult, but we did get a really firm baseline up through that early report. Clear schedule with milestones, planning and integration. So relentless is the word we like to use. Relentless on project controls. Very boring stuff, project controls. But if you do it day in, day out on all your projects, report it thoroughly, it does give you that underpinning and that discipline. Of course, you need political commitment. I mean, you know better than me about what that means. And we had that all the way through the Olympics. The two main parties never fell out, never used it as a football score points of each other. And that was really, really helpful. And we always like to say, obviously, the Olympics is rather apt. Projects are a team game, and we need to collaborate. So let's move on. Something more recent. Something that's obviously had a few more challenges, but some very good stuff as well. So you all know about Crossrail, I imagine. And this is how it was set up. It is a special purpose company. It's owned by TfL. DFT and TfL are joint sponsors. And so it's quite sort of slightly unusual in that we did have 2 separate sponsors, and we had this joint sponsorship team embedded in the 2 organizations, which were, in fact, our client. I was sat here in Crossrail originally as the program director from 2014. By the way, after the Olympics, I was enticed over to Network Rail by David Higgins, a persuasive person. I went to join Network Rail for a year and a half, and then I joined Crossrail in 2014. So similar setup to ODA, although a different legal structure. It was a company owned by TfL. ODA was a non-departmental public body. This is different. And we were responsible for designing and delivering the whole of the works. The money came from central government and local grant. You're probably quite familiar with all that. And of course, no longer the case, but it was the case for a very long time. Procurement. Crossrail is broken down into a huge number of contracts, 60 main contracts. One of the reasons was we were in the recession. Contractors did not want big packages. We went out to do the supply chain engagement. Nobody wanted to go over about 300 million. Even in consortia, they wouldn't be willing to do that. HS2 was quite different. I think they were getting an appetite for much bigger. So we were stuck with having to have lots of smaller packages. Of course, we had to use an OJU, and we had NEC option A and C on cost and also. And you can see value was about 400 million at the most, even with consortium, so quite limited. The challenge was to build a huge railway through the middle of London without causing the city to close, as a fact has this morning through the royal opening. But we had to make sure London stayed open, and it is a very big railway, much bigger than existing, and therefore very challenging in certain technical and engineering grounds. But again, this is not just about building stuff. This is about making sure people are safe. So a lot of focus, even more focus on health and safety here, and absolutely rigorous, relentless approach to making sure, as far as we possibly could, that people went home safe every day. And the stats were pretty good. This is the ODA, sort of to an equivalent timeline. And the dark one is Crossrail. Crossrail, you can see quite a lot of similarities, actually, quite interesting. Crossrail got down, when I left, Crossrail was 0.07, so we were down here, that last arrow is in December 18, so it was industry leading. Look at all your programs and measure safety. In fact, someone, I'm sure, has done that. It would be interesting to see where each program lies nationally, because we measured ourselves against a whole basket of comparators, but obviously you want to limit it. Hello. Sorry. So we thought we had a pretty reasonable record, and in fact, very important record to maintain in all senses of the word. Tunneling is the first thing, of course. If you're trying to build an underground railway, you need tunnels, and we had a huge number of TBMs which were mobilised pretty quickly, and there was quite an effective and efficient move towards getting tunnelling started. And that's what your TBM leaves behind. Clean, hopefully dry. You can see there's a little bit of water, but they were pretty dry. Nice segmental, precast segmental concrete lined tunnels. And that is then the start, really, of the next phase. And that's what the tunnels leave you behind. They also leave this behind because it was not all TBM tunneling. There was a method called sprayed concrete, SCL. We used to call it the new Austrian tunneling method years ago. People got bored with the length of that, and they said SCL is much better. SCL basically means you dig it out with a machine and you spray it with concrete from a gun. It's actually very efficient for shortish and difficult junctions. You can see here a whole number of junctions. These are for ventilation tunnels. TBMs don't do that sort of thing very well. They do long, straight, continuous runs very well, but if you've got junctions, then sprayed concrete is better. And that's what we used. Of course, then we have to line it because in this part of the tunnel, this is Farringdon Station actually, there are lots of water-bearing strata at Farringdon, a lot of sands and gravels, and you would have had a real problem with infiltration. So you get this astonishing visual, I can't describe what it was like really walking through that, quite amazing. This huge tunnel, bright orange, really extraordinary sight. And then of course stations. Station boxes went okay-ish. Station civils went pretty well. some of the cladding. I'll come on to some of the lessons learned in a moment, but sort of not too bad in many ways. Lots of stations, 10 new stations underground, and I'll come on to some of the lessons learned. MEP stations, MEP are a lot more difficult. Huge numbers of lessons we learned about what we do differently on MEP, the mechanical and electrical plant. How you get all this very complicated cables, pipes and wires, ventilation, telecoms, all the rest of it into a very tight underground space efficiently, without clashes, with design, fully integrated and so on. That was actually very hard indeed. Systems, of course, having built tunnels, you've got to build track. So this is the start of track laying. We use large concrete trains. These are machines simply to pump concrete out the back of one end in tunnels. So what looks like a very huge, large machine literally simply pumps concrete out. This is different. This is that. Yeah, that's the nozzle. So that's the back end of the concrete train. That's what you get. Track is placed, concrete is poured in situ, which embeds the sleepers in what is called track slab. So I know HS2 has gone to fully track slab, no ballast at all. Similarly on Crossrail, we are almost, well, in tunnels we're all on track slab, and you'll have a similar process. There are variants, but it will be broadly similar. Of course, new trains were the responsibility of TfL rather than Crossrail, and that led to some challenges. But some fantastic new trains are arriving, or in fact, many of them are already there. Some big challenges with signalling I'll come on to. But again, some other stuff, oversight development. We can earn good money, we, the government, can earn good money from selling space above our stations. And I know people have looked at that very hard. I worked on Euston when I was in Network Rail. We had huge opportunities for oversight development, which I think some of which will be realised. But on Crossrail, we've got very big oversight development opportunities and very big amounts of income coming back to the public sector. There's more we can do on that. We should be pushing that leverage a lot harder in the future. Not only from oversight development, but from the added value of transport. Now, we all know that the Green Book is quite restrictive on these things. We have to convince Treasury that wider economic benefits need to be more fully taken into account in the business cases, particularly on major transport projects. Skills I talked about, we had a massive program of skills development. We built training centres for underground tunnelling, still exist, and we handed over to TfL. But a lot of time on apprentices, trying to get people into the industry, properly trained, properly skilled up. Of course, environment, hugely important. We took the tunnelling muck, which we tried to take almost all by river. You can't put it into vehicles, really. People don't like these huge trucks rumbling past their windows at night. 24-hour operations on it, of course. We took it by river and we built a sort of wetlands habitat with the RSPB over in Essex. Almost all the Crossrail muck has gone to build these islands in this huge wetlands on the Thames in Essex. Lots of lots of objectives around carbon during construction, around emissions in tunnels, around low energy systems during construction, trying to push the boundaries on carbon emissions, not only in the long term, but also during construction. Archaeology I talked about. This was a burial pit which had Black Death burials, which of course caused enormous amounts of excitement among a certain part of the fraternity. Oh my God, are we all going to be contaminated? Well, no. But it was very interesting. This actually was a grout pit. So where you have to inject grout to sort of prop up the buildings, and you build lots of pits around the tunnels in order to inject grout. You basically sort of pump the building back up when it settles. And this was a grout pit that we found all these bodies in. We like to think, Crossrail, we like to think they were the first digital railway. That was great because it meant, efficient digital signaling systems, very high frequency, reliable, but also enormous complexity. So it's all very well, being the first, but if you are the first, you've got to expect to carry the challenges of that groundbreaking. So whilst we are a digital railway, it has led to quite a lot of issues. So what have we learned from all this? Well, I think we did that, like the Olympics, clear vision, clear objectives, clear strategy. We did have Good set of project controls. Actually, I thought it was one of the best I've ever seen. I've seen a lot. And we did have very strong change control. I think we were pretty good about. And the soft behaviors, the thing about leadership, the thing about values. The good thing about setting up project companies, special purpose vehicles, is you can create your own set of values. You can build your organization in the image you want it to be. So the right behaviors, authentic, supportive cultures we like to talk about. Do you get the right kind of organization that encourages the right people to want to join, to give their best possible performance? And I think we did have a lot of that. Good collaboration and good on innovation and Crossrail. All those things I think were very good indeed. Trust and transparency, single source of the truth, no blame cultures, and listen. All these things you might say pretty obvious in terms of major projects. So whilst many extraordinary things were achieved, obviously it didn't all go according to plan, as we ultimately experienced. So this was the original schedule. Ignore the red bars at the end. I couldn't quite get them to PowerPoint skills are pretty limited. And originally, 15.9 billion was the budget back in 2008, 7-8. Of course, when we got, well, I'll just take you through these. The original estimate of cost way back then was actually set around 17. So we started around 17, we came down to about 16. And at that point, the end date of December 18 was, in fact, I think actually the December 18, Matt probably remembers, was fixed a little bit later. During 2009, when the program partner were engaged, a big exercise was carried out at Crossrail, which came up with an estimate of about 17.8 billion. Of course, that was hugely unwelcome internally, and of course unacceptable to everyone. And so a value engineering exercise was carried out to try and push this budget back down within the 15.9, which had been subsequently agreed. And I think everybody convinced themselves that that was the case, that that would happen. I'll just put all these up. What actually happened is in the spending review, the budget was reduced by $1 billion because the new administration thought, I know what, we'll take a knife to some of these, we'll just knock $1 billion off. And by the way, I think we agreed, Crossrail agreed, probably had no choice, but Crossrail accepted, the sponsors accepted, the $1 billion will be knocked off, but actually the program will be extended. It's interesting. I'm not quite sure how anybody thought that would happen, but anyway, they did. So we agreed that actually the budget was 14.8, and I think that's when the December end date was then agreed. So we agreed that that was the budget, and we agreed that was the end date. Of course, what happened was, as we got through into 2017 and 18, that was under enormous challenge indeed. And of course, subsequently, we had to announce in August 18 that the December date was no longer achievable, and that we would need more time and therefore more money as well. And ultimately, this figure has been accepted, I think, slightly after my time, but 17.6 billion, which is squiggly like the number that was estimated then. Sure, that's a coincidence. And of course, as seriously, well, it is serious, the dates have gone up. So many challenges have existed in terms of the program, and I'll just go into a little bit about what I think some of those are. Many inquiries have been held, many people have gone up in front of PAC, NA have done copious reports. I don't know if you all have the time to read them. If you're interested, but you can do. This is Simon Wright's analysis, not a synthesis of anybody else's. So you can agree, you can disagree. I am an independent person representing nobody other than myself. Please do not take this as the Crossrail view or anybody else's view other than mine. So it's clear now, with the greater benefit of hindsight, that there was too much focus on tunneling and civil engineering for too long. Reason? It's blooming hard and there's a huge amount of risk in the ground. But we should have paid more attention earlier. And we did pay plenty of attention, but we didn't pay enough attention to integration and systems early on. Systems and their integration were much more complicated than I suppose we probably initially thought. It became much more complicated. Procuring the rolling stock separately from the infrastructure, TfL responsible for rolling stock, Crossrail responsible for infrastructure, does not help one iota. Not a good thing to do. Please don't do it again. Put it together, one client. Too many designers. We had far too many people doing little bits of design and too many interfaces. And of course, who's left to manage the interfaces? The client. The only person left. Do not believe that that's a good plan. Fewer designers, bigger packages, as fewer interfaces we can possibly organize. Lack of standardization. For whatever reason, and I don't know, we ended up with 10 completely different stations. Very distinctive. Nice architecture, by the way. In terms of my design ethos, fantastic. I think they're going to be brilliant. They're going to be breathtaking stations. But they're all different. Even the GFRC, the glass reinforced concrete, that nice white lining Crossrail. Each one of those is designed by a different person and are different. They look the same, but actually they're all different. Now that doesn't make any sense, does it? We should standardize far more. We should standardize everything we possibly can so it's repeated. It doesn't have to look identical, but we must be working towards standardization and modularization of everything, including architectural finishes. That doesn't mean we do away with architectural quality, not at all. These are different things. Signaling systems. Please, let's not do this again. 3 we've got. Sorry, I missed one. Well, 3. Crossrail, the new bit in pink, is CBTC, Airborne Train Control. Communication-based train control, I call it CAB. ETCS over in the west, on the new system, which is one of the first introductions of ERTMS, as you will know. Then we've got the old legacy system out here, and we've got the old legacy system back there. And down here, we've got CBTC as well. All those 3 systems have to be on the train. The train has to migrate at speed from one to t'other without any faults or problems. It is very, very hard to organize that. Technically, very challenging. And of course, because the train is being procured by somebody else, even more challenging. So that is being very difficult, remains very difficult. There's no getting away from the fact that this hasn't really come out in any of the reports, in my view, that the supply chain performance was poor in many places. Productivity was weak and much lower than their plan and our plan. The joint plan, which we created with the supply chain, very rarely did they ever achieve it. Very rare. Option C broke down in the complexity of the 60 interconnected packages. This intertwining of the schedule led to incentives and penalties not really working as planned. So the whole structure of NEC doesn't really lend itself to that level of complexity. We were short of some special resources, particularly in SCADA and GSMR. GSMR, the only people who use it, Network Rail's radar system, very few people who know it works. Many of them are kind of reaching a certain age. And when we persist in adopting it on new programs, where are the people going to come from to run GSMR in the next? I mean, it sounds like a trivial issue in the greater scheme of things. When you get down to it, actually, the railway can't open without this. It is a must-have. We couldn't find enough people to do that. DOO, driver-only operators, the cameras for the doors, very controversial with the unions. Very difficult to get that to work well. So, lots of complexity. We had SCADA on the vent fans, for Christ's sake. Why did anybody think that was a good idea? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Not always a good idea to plaster the place with sensors and new technology just because they're Think about the complexity of trying to actually test and commission this stuff. And at the end of the day, the tier one contractors upon whom we as clients wholly rely to provide the specialists and the people who actually do this work, they themselves did not understand the designs or the integration of all this technology. They do not have the competence to do it. And I'm not the only person saying that. You talk to Mace on a completely different job at the Spurs Stadium. The reason that was delayed was very, very similar. And they rely completely on their tier twos and threes, the subcontractors who have all the specialisms. And they, of course, they're not at the top table. We don't talk to them very much. We should do, by the way. Certainly, we'll be doing more of it. In terms of the schedule, we talk to tier ones. That's who we have a contract with. So, separation of the IM, the infrastructure managers, from the deliverer, which I know the reasons why we do it, but it can lead, in fact, it did lead to significant duplication. So they like to look at everything in detail at a completely duplicated design team and checking team. It led to huge delays. Is it really necessary? Do you not trust the deliverer to actually design and deliver according to the requirements? Because the IM have to check everything. Interesting in what you're doing on HS2. We wanted to have whole life costing, but there is no standard model for how you do it. So we argued endlessly about what was the right way and wrong way. Could someone write one, please, and then publish it to all of us so we're all doing the same thing? When I say someone, I mean government, because only really can come from government. I think in Network Rail we tried to do it, but I did write one in Network Rail, but it really didn't have the oomph that it needs to. In the future, I think the client should carry out more design themselves, so we can make sure that it is standard and comparable across the program, and it is fully integrated. Trying to get private sector to do some, and we do then integrate some, and then there's 23 other, on the platform train interface, down at the platform level, you've got a civils platform, you've got platform screen doors, civils platform 1, contractor 1, platform screen doors, contractor 2, train, contractor 3 with a different client, the signalling, contractor 4, etc., etc. I think there are 17 contracts at the platform train interface. Got all the cameras above, you've got the radio, 3 radio systems. All those designers have to come together to agree the integration on that one single interface. Multiply that by 10,000 and you get a picture of how complicated this thing is. It is completely mind-blowing. So we have to standardize it and simplify it. Can we not build standard stations that are all identical apart from the architecture at the road? Up at the road level, I'm talking about metros, by the way. I'm not talking about Birmingham or HS2, I'm talking about metros. Should they not be standard below ground at level -1 and lower? Why can't they be standard? You just have to dig the right shaped hole after all. And temporary ventilation. The capacity of our ventilation system is governed by the diesel trains you need to build the railway, not by the electric trains you need to run it. And that doesn't make any sense to me. Can we surely invent engineering trains which are electrically driven? Hang on. The FT. You'll need them in HS2 mode. So when cost overrun and schedule slippage is forecast, then a combined approach is very, very helpful. We do need to have, I think, just on a human level, the ability to stick together. Becomes very, very difficult as things get tough. It is often the case that divisions become evident. Political pressure to suppress bad news must be resisted. I know you will, I don't know whether you agree with that, but it is often the case that the lords and masters do not like to hear bad news. They want to hear it. Don't tell me that. Go away and sort it out. What do you think you're there for? Your job is to sort these things out. Don't come and tell me that. Well, that's fine, but doesn't mean it always goes away. And in fact, in this case, it didn't go away. So it was worse when it was announced than it might have been if it was all accepted. I still think firm end dates are a good thing. I've personally been criticised quite significantly for sticking to firm end dates, but I'm a strong believer in it. I will go to my grave believing this is a good thing. Reason why: it does drive contractor performance. We now have a situation in Crossrail where there's a window, 6-month window. How can you drive a contractor to finish in a window or to a window? I don't get it at all. How would you've got the chief executive of Langer sitting in front of you. Ray, I want to talk to you about the opening window. What do you mean, Simon? I mean that we have to finish within the window. But when do you want us to finish? Oh, within the window. What does it mean? I have no clue how you have that conversation. An end date is clear. It is the date you will finish, Mr. O'Rourke. Now, I get the point about head in sand, believing your own PR and all that stuff. So it's not without its challenges. But if you don't have firm end dates, I cannot see how you drive private sector performance. And I've worked in the private sector a long time. So I believe in it. I think we should be brave and announce end dates. I know it's tough. Live with it. We won't always achieve them, by the way, and we have to get over that point. But it does help a hell of a lot in driving contractors. On big programs, I still think once you're in flow, once you're in play, the shortest program is still, for me, the cheapest. Not everybody agrees with that. At the beginning, you've got to devise what is the most efficient program. I'm not saying just make it as short as you possibly can and it will inevitably be the cheapest. Of course not. It has to be efficient. Once you set an efficient program, sticking to it and achieving the shortest end date is going to be the cheapest. We were spending £100 million a period on Crossrail. 2 periods, a lot of money. And finally, Crossrail will, of course, deliver all the benefits and more, but it won't do it as early as was planned, and that, of course, is a massive disappointment to everybody, and a massive personal disappointment to those involved. The forecasts were insufficiently robust, our forecasts, and they didn't reflect the contractor's productivity. We were probably overly optimistic that they would improve, which is what they had all promised to do, but they never did. So how do we drive up contractor performance? Of course, we're not blaming the contractor, we're not saying it's all their fault. We, clients, have to make it possible for them to perform better. It's our responsibility to give them the environment where they can perform more effectively. We've got to realign incentives, and we've got to make sure their margins are improved. They won't work for nothing. It's no good saying to contractors, when there's £100 million deficit in their account, your problem, mate, they'll go bust. Not even 100 million, 20 million. Most contractors will go bust if there's a 20 million deficit. So no good saying that. You can't say, oh, we've got to be tough on the contractor, make sure they soak it up. Never going to work. They will simply go out of business. We will be left with the problem, as we've seen with Carillion. It's not an option. So we've got to make their lives more efficient and productive and allow them to make better margins, which they will hopefully invest in the business. We've got to reduce complexity and we've got to get standardization on everything we possibly can. And we need to think about a new procurement model. Does Project 13 have any legs? Don't you know what that is? It's the the IC's new model, which is a new way of carving up risk. It's all about carving up and assigning risk. And when things go wrong, please be aware that adding more layers of governance does not actually help improve delivery. It might make us all feel better, but it does nothing for the people at the sharp end who are actually trying to deliver projects. Lessons learned, of course, is vital, but we do actually need to be allowed to fail. It's got to the point where it's so hugely unacceptable to fail. You can imagine that the next cadre of people who want to come into major programs are looking and going, no, thanks very much. I don't want to go through that kind of crap. I'm not going to do that. So we're completely disincentivizing young people from coming into this industry to run big programs because failure is so unacceptable now that can you imagine how risk averse they will become? if you say, not you, we all say risk is unacceptable. Sorry, failure is so unacceptable. I'm not going to take any risk then. If you want to have absolute certainty, guaranteed, I'm going to double the budget, I'm going to double the schedule. Right. To be concerned about it. So we have to have a balance there. Otherwise, we will have so much risk absorbed into programs that we will never afford to do anything. So we've got to allow, not condone, not reward, not sort of goes unanswered, but failure cannot be so bad for projects and programs that people then become so risk averse that they refuse to take any more risk. That's it. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Questions?
I mean, I'll start off with one. So I was here responsible for Crossrail. You were on the inside of Crossrail Limited. Looking back, hindsight's a marvellous thing. When would you say kind of things were starting to go off track? What were the point you think that looking back, I mean, I say hindsight's a fantastic thing to look at. Where do you think there are things that we could have done differently and spotted that things weren't going quite right?
I think track installation was much slower than we hoped. I mean, certainly, so Christmas, we got to the point, certainly, I think Christmas 16, so by Christmas 16, we should have had all the tracking, and we went a long way off that. So that was a big wake up, really. But everybody, everybody was optimistic, and everybody we had a plan that we would show the recovery. I suppose but that was a big flag, big red flag. Then certainly late 17, when we had an explosion with a big component down at the electrical substation, which put back the start of testing by 4 months. That was another big wake up. That probably should have been the trigger actually. So I would say, by October 17, we probably should have said it's not going to happen there. But there were some earlier pretty serious warning signs before that. Civils and tunnels have gone really well, more or less. But by the time we got to track installed and systems installed, they were very, very far behind the curve by then. But, there was always a plan that showed that it could be recovered. So there was this reluctance, I take my full share of responsibility for that, to say, well, we've overcome so many problems, surely we can overcome this one. And that's where the criticism of, overly optimistic, head in the sand kind of attitude has been levied. I think so.
Other questions?
Hi, so I'm responsible for Matt on Crossrail now. One of the debates we are having is the tier one contractors are almost kind of stuck on this job. We're hearing from the ODA level approach where you've got a different organisation and essentially to finish off the job. Just wondering what your views are on that, how well it works.
Yeah, very different circumstances. So the ODA, actually, the delivery partner always had tier one authority or capability. So we always said to CLM, CH2 and Hill Langer or Mace, two latter important because we had two contractors in there. We always said to them that they may become the contractor of last resort, or indeed just a contractor if we thought it was efficient. And they did actually take on some of the temporary venue stuff, but it was relatively straightforward building work. Whereas, and they started it out, they started from the beginning. So we said to them, we want you to CM, construction manage these 4 packages of work, probably 50, 100 million, fairly simple building work, and they would CM it. To get someone in new to take over a complicated systems project, no, risk will be huge. If you ask Bechtel to do it, first of all, there'd be a 1 year, sorry, I'm not Bechtel, but there would be a huge delay because they'd want a lot of time to get their head around the risks and the issues. Then, of course, they want to give you a price, which would not be the price you thought it was going to be initially, be a lot more, because they would have to be heavily incentivized. Jubilee line, what happened on Jubilee? We all know what happened on Jubilee line. So you get that sort of reaction. They would do it eventually, but I think you would probably be better off at this stage sticking with who you have. Be my advice, not knowing anything about the detail now, but I think
Final question, and then I'll
So I'm
close,
really
but then ask
interested-
for supplementaries after
This
this.
lady has got a question.
Oh, sorry, one, two, sorry. David?
I'm really interested about your comment on the tier one in the supply chain, looking to the tier two for system integration, and then your earlier comment about the degree of finessing at the design stage. I just wanted to draw you a bit more about whether it was design stage or it was the tier one, tier two relationship, or if it's both, the level of novelty you had in there.
I think we got ourselves a
Two things
bit
wrapped.
twisted around the axle design. We had different, so civils and M&E, we handed over to the design and build contractor at different stages.
Yeah.
Contractors were very reluctant to accept the M&E design that we'd done and sort of wanted to tear it and go back to square one. And we said, well, there's no time for that. You've got to, you know, so they said, well, we're not accountable for any of it. So we have a lot of problems with things like a stair pressurization. I mean, these all sound like trivial issues, but they're not when you come down to it. Stair pressurization, fire strategies, a lot of problems with all that stuff. Them taking on the accountability. Putting one station like Paddington, putting an underground station next to a metro rail station, massively complicating fire evacuation, you can imagine. So that all became very, very convoluted. So my sense, I mean, is we should just, the client should just do it. Get it done, get it right. Don't go out to tender until you've done it. Go out to tender later in the design process. Of course, contractors do need to do some design. I wouldn't suggest we do the rebar, go back to that. We can't do all the plant and equipment because that comes down to product selection. But the main runs of cable, vent, all that stuff, we've got to do much more about integrating it and standardizing it. 10 stations, surely we should have one design for most stuff, not 10 designs for every
So
set.
that's both more involvement in design stage,
Yeah.
but also an involvement in the installation.
No, let the tier ones install it. I wouldn't suggest the client becomes the installer. That would be, other than going back to the original question about having a delivery partner who could do that. But I think let the tier ones, but what we've got to do is be aware of the tier ones competence in systems and integration, and to check it much more thoroughly at tender stage. And to, you know, I've written, maybe I'll put it on there, I remember I've said, call for Google. You know, I don't think we've got the right skills in our industry at all. You know, maybe we should be saying to ourselves, Langer, you know, I'm not picking on Langer, actually, they're one of the good guys. Costain, let's pick on them. Costain, for goodness sake, get yourselves partnered up with Google or somebody who understands technology. Next time you do a big systems integration piece, I want to see who's going to do the system integration. I want to see that tender stage. That's what I think we should be doing. We shouldn't just trust that they know how to do it. They don't. I mean, it's beyond any of our comprehension how difficult this stuff is now. My son's in IT, and I was trying to, he was telling me what they do. I mean, they wouldn't, you know, muddy-booted civil engineers are not competent to do this stuff. And that's what's happening. Not doing it, but managing it. We're not competent to manage it. We've got to find a different way to lead it, understand it, and integrate it. We've got to bring a whole new cadre of people into the industry. We're going to go down, and we are going to go down this route. It's inevitable. We have to. But the old idea that this is all about civil engineering and muddy boots is only true up to a very initial point. And we've got to get the tunneling right. I'm not saying that's not important. We don't pay attention to systems integration earlier, we get the right people in much earlier, we're going to fail repeatedly on these big, complicated technology projects.
So I think the point for me was, I think you've almost got across that as two projects, in my view. There's a bit of like the building the tunnels and stations bit, and then there's the fitting out them. And they're really, really different, aren't they? In terms of the skills and the requirements to manage, integrate, etc. And sometimes, in my view, I think you look at them in two separate places because they're so different in terms of what the challenges are.
It's 2.5 now, because you've got the integration of the existing rail, legacy systems that can take that 40 or 50
Yeah.
years.
Final question.
Yes, I was just going to ask, you mentioned that the cost was slashed and cost for 2 by $1 billion. At that stage, did you look at cost, schedule, time, all the factors and see what for that amount of money we had to lose, or was it just slash the cost but still build the same?
Not very well, sorry, to not trying to, but I wasn't around actually. So, but what I understand happened is you can imagine, I mean, you must have been through comprehensive spending reviews with the face. And, I don't know how it quite works internally, but what I imagine and what we saw, or I've seen elsewhere is, we are just told that it's $1 billion going to come off. Now, there is some attempt to sort of value engineer that, to sort of, if you like, justify it or allow it. But in reality, the decision's already been made, so you're backfitting, if you like, the justification to the sum. There's not really a cost saving that's actually been created. It's a political gesture. We had it on the Olympics. They knocked 400 million off the Olympic program late on, because they said we didn't need the cladding around the main stadium. We then found 400 million of private sponsorship to put it back in, normally. But in this case, it's £1 billion, and no, there was no real initial justification that I had any knowledge of, although I wasn't there at the time myself. So it just kind of got absorbed. It had to be dealt with in the risk, I suppose. It had to come out of the risk pot. Risk pot was quite big at that time. That was one of the problems. Is the risk pot was pretty large still, because we did all the right things about optimism bias and all that good stuff. So the risk pot was significant, but of course it got eaten up quite quickly.
I draw a line there for questions on site over time. If we want to ask Simon a question specifically,
He'll be here for a minute or two.
here for a minute or two, is that okay? I just say from our perspective, it's very, very insightful. I was going to relay 3 or 4 things I've learned, but you all sat here with me as well. Can I just say thank you, Simon, in a time-honoured way.
Yeah.